What if the Clone Wars weren't an accident, but a war engineered to destroy the Republic from within? Not with superweapons or coups, but through laws, emergency powers, and fear made normal. The Clone Wars weren't chaos, they were choreography. To most of the galaxy, it looked like war. In reality, it was a plan to reshape the system itself. The Clone Wars weren't about defeating an enemy, they were about transforming governance, with almost everyone's consent. A republic already cracking. Before the first shot, long before the first battle erupted, the Galactic Republic was already decaying from within. Its problems were not sudden or dramatic, but slow, systemic, and deeply embedded. Bureaucracy had turned governance into a maze of committees, procedures, and delays where urgent issues stalled for years. Decisions that once protected the galaxy now drowned in debate, loopholes, and political bargaining. The Senate chamber still looked grand, but functionally it had become a place where influence mattered more than solutions. Corruption thrived in that environment. Corporate interests and powerful trade organizations learned how to bend policy without ever breaking the law outright. Entire star systems watched wealth flow upward toward the core worlds while their own economies stagnated. Taxes were collected, resources extracted, and promises made, but representation felt increasingly hollow. The Republic still claimed to stand for unity, yet for many worlds that unity felt one-sided. The Separatist movement didn't emerge because people suddenly became villains or radicals. It emerged because frustration reached a breaking point. Large portions of the galaxy genuinely believed the Republic no longer represented them, no longer listened to them, and no longer cared whether they thrived or failed. When systems began breaking away, it felt less like rebellion and more like resignation, like walking away from a structure that had already abandoned them. That dissatisfaction was real, widespread, and emotionally powerful. And that is precisely why the coming war worked. A fabricated conflict collapses when people stop believing in it. But a guided conflict, built on genuine grievances and quietly steered in a specific direction, can reshape an entire civilization. The Clone Wars were not imposed on the galaxy. They grew naturally out of a system already coming apart. The manufactured emergency that changed everything. The true turning point of the Clone Wars wasn't a battle, an invasion, or a planetary catastrophe. It was a vote. When separatist threats escalated and war appeared inevitable, the Senate did what fragile governments often do in moments of fear. It concentrated power in the name of efficiency. Emergency powers were granted to the Chancellor so decisions could be made quickly and decisively, bypassing the slow mechanisms of democratic debate. On paper, the move appeared reasonable, even responsible. After all, a galaxy at war couldn't afford endless discussion while enemies mobilized. But emergency power has a hidden cost. It removes friction. It turns deliberation into delay and disagreement into obstruction. Once leaders experience the speed of unilateral authority, returning to shared power feels inefficient, almost irresponsible. The Senate didn't feel like it was surrendering democracy. It felt like it was protecting it. That illusion is what made the moment so dangerous. Power wasn't seized through violence or coercion. It was handed over willingly, wrapped in procedure and legality. The Republic didn't fall because democracy was abolished. It fell because democracy was politely asked to step aside, just for now, with the promise that normal governance would return once the crisis passed. Crises, however, have a way of extending themselves. The clone army. Then came the most suspicious miracle in galactic history. At the exact moment the Republic needed an army, a fully trained, fully equipped clone force was discovered waiting on Camino. Millions of soldiers. Uniform loyalty, instant deployment, no messy conscription, no public debate, and almost no questions. The official explanation that the army had been commissioned years earlier by a Jedi acting alone should have triggered alarm bells across the galaxy. Instead, it triggered relief. The Republic was desperate, the Senate was scared, and the Jedi, pressured by responsibility, accepted command. That decision changed everything. when peacekeepers become generals. The Jedi Order was never meant to command armies. They were mediators, philosophers, and guardians of balance. The Clone Wars forced them into a role that slowly hollowed them out. As generals, the Jedi made tactical decisions instead of moral ones. They ordered troops into combat. They accepted casualties as necessary. Over time, the line between defense and domination blurred. Worse, the Jedi became politically entangled. Once that happened, it became easy to frame them not as guardians of peace, but as another faction competing for influence. The war didn't just exhaust the Jedi physically, it compromised them symbolically. And that made what came next possible. A war designed to last just long enough. The Clone Wars lasted 3 years, long enough to normalize emergency powers, long enough to militarize the Republic's identity, and long enough to exhaust every institution that could resist authoritarianism. This was not a short, decisive conflict. It was a grinding, galaxy-wide stalemate by design. Clone forces were elite but costly. Droid armies were endless but disposable. The war could continue indefinitely without either side collapsing too quickly. And during that time, fear became routine. Surveillance expanded, secrecy increased, the Senate grew quieter. Citizens stopped asking when the war would end and started asking only whether they were safe. That shift matters more than any battle. Villains, pawns, and a necessary enemy. Publicly, the Separatists were framed as the great threat to unity. Their droid armies, corporate backing, and aggressive expansion made them perfect antagonists. But behind the scenes, their leadership structure was carefully manipulated. The Separatists needed to be dangerous, but not victorious. Strong, but not decisive. They existed to justify the Republic's transformation, not to replace it. Every Separatist attack reinforced the argument for stronger leadership. Every Republic failure reinforced the need for more authority. The war fed itself politically, even when it stalled militarily. That is the signature of a designed conflict. The clones. Here is where the Clone Wars stop being tragic and start being terrifying. Clone troopers were not just engineered for combat efficiency. They were engineered for obedience. Embedded within them was a control mechanism that ensured loyalty, even against their own commanders. Order 66 was not an improvisation, it was pre-installed. The Republic's greatest symbol of security was also its greatest vulnerability. The army that defended the Jedi was designed to destroy them on command. No persuasion, no hesitation, no resistance. The war didn't just end with betrayal, it ended exactly as planned. How Order 66 worked so perfectly. By the time Order 66 was executed, the galaxy was ready for it. The Jedi had become generals instead of mystics. Their authority felt political. Their presence felt militarized. When they were accused of treason, the claim didn't sound impossible, it sounded plausible. That is the final success of the Clone Wars. Not the elimination of the Jedi, but the removal of outrage. The galaxy didn't revolt, it accepted the explanation. It trusted the system that had protected it for 3 years of war. And the Republic became the Empire without firing a single shot at the Senate. Why the Clone Wars are the most realistic Star Wars story. The Clone Wars are terrifying not because of what happens, but because of how it happens. No single decision feels evil. Every step feels justified. Every compromise feels temporary. Every surrender of power feels necessary. That's how real systems collapse. Not through villains kicking down doors, but through citizens applauding stability while freedom quietly exits the room. The Clone Wars aren't about heroes versus villains. They're about institutions under pressure, and what happens when fear becomes the most persuasive voice in the room. The war that replaced a republic with applause. In the end, the Clone Wars achieved their true objective. The galaxy didn't just lose the Jedi, it lost the habit of questioning authority. The Republic wasn't overthrown, it was transformed. Slowly, legally, willingly. That is why the Clone Wars remain one of the most chilling narratives in Star Wars history. Not because of the battles, but because the war was never meant to end in peace. It was meant to end in control. And that's the real legacy of the Clone Wars. If this video changed the way you see the Clone Wars and made you realize how much of the war was designed rather than accidental, you're in the right place. If you want to be smarter every day, like and subscribe.